Look how grey I'm getting. Look at this. This is 35, ladies, men, and gentle people. Look at this. Look at it! 35.
You're not young! I say this to help you.
Hello, everyone. Is everyone all right? Yes? I'm all right, thank you. Today I want to share what I read in the month of May of 2022. And I've read quite a lot this month. I didn't realise until I sort of stacked it all up. And then I was like, oh, I've read quite a lot. Yes, I think I've got 10 books to talk about this month. 10 books. I mean, none of them are kind of massive whoppers like I usually do, so maybe that has something to do with it, but flipping heck. Right, so the first book that I read in May of 2022 is a big old. It is 1980 Flipping 4 by George Flipping Orwell. Oh! Right, 1984. This is the first time I've read 1984. Right, we've got a lot to talk about with this one. So first of all, I want to talk about this edition, which I think is amazing. I am in love with this book cover choice. Look at it. Usually with classic books or with backlist books, I usually have no qualms in getting them secondhand because, you know, why would you pay $8.99 for a Charles Dickens book? And with 1984, you are really spoiled for choice with the amount of editions there are of 1984. There's just tons and tons and tons and tons of different versions. They all seem to have eyes on them. That seems to be a common feature, as might be understandable. But this is the latest edition from Penguin Modern Classics, and I just thought I love this cover, the design and the thing, Francis Bacon. I know, but I just think it's gorgeous, really really gorgeous. Anyway, so 1984. So so I was never really too keen on getting to 1984. A couple of years ago, I read Animal Farm, which was cool. I think I've talked about it in like a very very early wrap up. Animal Farm, and yeah, I just wasn't very kind of interested in getting to 1984 until earlier this year. I think in January, I read a collection of George Orwell's essays, and those essays, it just kind of really piqued my interest because he talks about totalitarianism and about his background, his childhood in this sort of terrible boarding school, and it just sort of got me interested about his politics. It was just really interesting. And sort of where he comes from and things. And so I was like, oh, all right, well, it's time to read 1984, isn't it? And yes, it is time to read 1984, ladies and men and gentle people. Okay, so this, I mean, the obvious things about this novel is that, you know, it's a dystopian political thing about, you know, mass surveillance and, you know, totalitarianism and all the rest of it. And yes, it's kind of the things that have come out of it in terms of pop culture are many and varied. So obviously Big Brother.
You're all taking the piss out of me. Why didn't you think of putting heated rollers in here?
You got Room 101, The Thought Police. So yes, it's kind of big in popular culture. And one of the things that I find fascinating, which I'm mostly going to talk about, is the way in which the novel is kind of appropriated, or bits of the novel are appropriated in political discourse as well, both by the left and the right, which is interesting to me. Right, so what we've got? So we've got Winston, aptly named, sort of. We've got Winston, who is a guy in his late 30s, I believe. He's kind of just a run-of-the-mill guy. He is working in a government department, which corrects the record or rectifies the record. So basically, his department is responsible for going into past documents, whether that be news articles, novels, books, anything, and basically destroying evidence of anything that goes against the party, and correcting it to what the party is saying now, as well as, you know, stamp out any type of dissent or any sort of criticism in kind of print form. It's his job to kind of take it out. However, when we find Winston, he is in a place of rebellion, or he has a feeling of, I don't want this anymore. And he has started to write a diary in his house, which is a big, big no-no. And he's kind of gotten word of that there might be some kind of underground resistance or some kind of rebellion group. And he also gets the feeling that a couple of people in his department might be part of this underground rebellion group. So in terms of where we are, I've sort of forgotten the main point of this book. So we have this scenario where the ruling upper class are keeping the middle class under intense extreme surveillance and control and power. The thinking behind that is that if you keep the middle class so kind of tightly in control, then you give the working class kind of nowhere to aspire to. So you can sort of leave the working class alone. But if you keep the middle class under tight, close surveillance, then you stop them from overpowering the government or whatever. And when I say intense surveillance, yes, we have cameras everywhere. We have cameras in your own home and microphones out in the street and everything. And we have these kind of very scary buildings like the Ministry of Love, which is actually a sort of torture place. The Ministry of Truth, which, obviously is where Winston works, which is not the Ministry of Truth. So yeah, we have like fake news, lots of fake news. So the novel is bleak. The novel is very bleak, as you can expect. And it's not only bleak in terms of its political dystopia, but it's also bleak in terms of its cynicism towards human nature, when it comes down to it, when it comes down to life and death like decisions, are we kind of heroic and sacrificial and, choose me, I am Spartacus? Or do we sell out? Do we sell other people out, including our loved ones? Do we throw them under the bus or throw them to the rats in this case? And yes, it's very bleak. So yeah, the main thing that I am interested, having read this book and sort of going into it, was the fact that it does prop up in political discourse, and also it does kind of, people from the left and the right do kind of go, oh yes, it's Orwellian, yeah, which was interesting to me. So it was published, I think, firstly in 1949, was that right? Because yeah, having read his essays, I was kind of thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be like a comment on fascism. No, it is not. So when it was first published, fascism in Europe had been defeated, obviously, but we had a new threat of communism, of Soviet Russia communism coming the other way, not geographically, but politically. And so yeah, George Orwell, he was a democratic socialist, and he was very angry at the way in which some governments or some people in power kind of used socialist ideals or language as a cover for their own totalitarian regimes or totalitarian kind of goals. So he was very angry about that. So a lot of what the party in this book does, you can say it's sort of like a very far left totalitarian way of doing things, like this kind of for example, like Big Brother. The poster boy for Big Brother is this guy in his 40s with piercing eyes and a big moustache, and that's Stalin, basically, isn't it? And also the party, one of the main things is they want to strip away individualism to an extreme degree. No individualism! And yeah, right-wing people might look at this book and go and say, yes, see, the Twitter sphere, the kind of people with free speech, we shouldn't have thought police around, and we should, aspire to greater things. We should be able to do that. And yes. But this is not just a comment on communism, on sort of totalitarian and communism. There are also elements of very far-right stuff in here as well. So we have a very intense sense of nationalism in this. So everyone is encouraged to have a very kind of jingoistic view and expression of their nationality. And there's also a very kind of intense thing about us and them. The hate week is a thing, so people are encouraged to sort of hate on people who are against the party and Big Brother and all the rest of it. And yes, and then as we've seen kind of in recent years, there is this thing about fake news, and sort of what is truth, and we've always said this. So yeah, so like anyone left wing can point at that and go, oh, see the rise of fascism, blah, blah, blah. So yes, a very interesting book in that respect. And so yeah, so the party in this book, it does have elements of both right and left totalitarian governments in it, which is interesting. So yeah, a lot of people do say, oh, this is just as relevant today as it was then, and yes, it is. I mean, in the UK and in the West in general, we do have a growing far right problem, and yeah, I mean there are elements of what is happening today, happening in this book, particularly kind of that's the sort of the post-truth sort of thing. The thing, no, we always said that, and yeah, and this sort of growing sense of us and them and othering and blaming others. It's all kind of being sort of ramped up in the past few months in the UK, anyway, past few weeks in the UK. So yes, it is very interesting and very very bleak. It's not kind of, I would say, anyone who sort of references this in a kind of political sense, saying like, "See," I sort of question that a little bit, because this is just about totalitarianism as a concept, not as a kind of left or right thing. It's about, there are certain people who, people are people, and people who want power will get power, whichever way that they can, given the circumstances of the climate in that particular place that they are in. And so, desperate governments do desperate things. But certainly, fascinating, and I'm glad to have read it now, because I sort of know what's going on, and yeah, it's an interesting one. Okay, next. So I read this, The Interesting Narrative of Olaudah Equiano. Right, so this is a memoir. This is a memoir that was published by Equiano in 1780 something, 1789. So this is fascinating and very kind of like, ugh. So Olaudah Equiano, he was, there's a bit of discrepancy about his origins, but he was born in what is now Nigeria, in a small community. At the age of 11, he was kidnapped and enslaved and put on a slave ship and sold off to people in the Caribbean. And he was enslaved for many, many years, until he was able at a certain point to buy his freedom. So he became a free man. And then following that, he became kind of like a sailor and sort of travelled in various different places around the world. So he went to the Arctic, and he went to Turkey, and he went to the States. So yes, this is basically an account of his life, and it's a very direct look at slavery and the transatlantic slave trade and the horrors and the barbarism that is associated with that. And yes, and it's particularly those early chapters. There is a weight that you have to kind of be prepared for, a sort of an emotional weight, because of the horrors that Equiano writes about. So obviously, I mean, kidnapping and enslaving people is one thing. The journey across the Atlantic in a slave ship is pretty horrific, and then the treatment that Africans were subjected to once they got to the Caribbean, not only working in plantations or whatever, for hours and hours and hours, but then just the torture, the sort of systematic rape, the murder, kind of mutilated. It's just, there was just anything you can imagine that is sort of evil kind of happened, and Equiano sort of discusses that. He doesn't sort of go into sort of details, but he does sort of talk about it, and it is a lot. And this memoir was used, I think, as for what I understand, as kind of like a political piece of literature in the abolitionist movement, which we shall sort of get to, kind of showing people like what was really going on. Yes, and also, I mean, so when he becomes a free man, that's also kind of thingable to read, because the the chances of being enslaved again were very high. And there's a couple of upsetting examples that Equiano talks about with these people who bought their freedom and then just were either kidnapped or put on trial for things that they didn't do and then just went back to being a slave again. And there are instances where he himself sort of has these sort of near misses. So it is a tough read, but it's really important. I think I found it really, I found it really sort of valuable as a piece of text, particularly if you're like me and you read a lot of kind of 19th century or 18th century fiction. It's just good to have this in mind because particularly in a novel, you get people saying, "Oh yes, my uncle has a plantation in the West Indies," and it's sort of very sort of offhand. But when they say that, this is what they mean. This is the kind of the reality of that. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. Obviously, prepare yourself before you do read it, but I would definitely recommend it, particularly if you read a lot of early Victorian or 18th century literature. I think it's just it's an important one. So yeah. Oh yeah, So the only sort of thing that's kind of disappointing about it, disappointing, it's an uncomfortable truth about the abolitionist movement. The abolitionists, they weren't kind of anti-racist in the way that we sort of think today, if you know what I mean. They were still, whilst they abhorred slavery and the barbaric practices that are happening, they still had this notion that white people were still superior to African people. There was a ceiling to their understanding of humankind. So yeah, it's just something to keep in mind as well. So next, there's a couple of books that I have pre-recorded my my wrap-up to. So let's go on to a week younger Ben. Okay, so I've got two books here that I need to talk about now because they are library books. And they are due any day now, so yes, let's talk about them now. They are both shortlisted Women's Prize for Fiction books. And the first one that I read was this one, Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. Right, this was fairly low on my priorities for what I was interested in reading for the Women's Prize, particularly in the long list. But then it was shortlisted and it was available at the library, so I was like, let's go on then, let's have a look. And I'm very glad I did, because this is fabulous. Excuse me. We have Martha, who is married to Patrick, and right at the beginning of the novel, Patrick walks out the door because of an argument, and it's like, oh, is he like ever going to come back? And so for the rest of the book, we kind of follow, or we chart Martha's kind of backstory. So her and Patrick, they are childhood friends, or he's kind of like a family friend. And yeah, we sort of go through her adolescence, then her and her relationship with her family and stuff. Then we see her have this sort of brief fling, a sort of a brief marriage, brief first marriage to this guy. And then, yeah, we see how they get together and get married and stuff. So a big factor in Martha's life is her mental health. She has a sort of mental illness which sort of comes in waves, and when it sort of hits, it can be fairly debilitating. So she has these very severe moments of depression, which is obviously at a big cost to her, but also to a big cost to the people around her, her loved ones, and particularly to Patrick as well, who's who wants to do the right thing and who's wants to care for her and stuff. And yes, and the novel is basically about Martha trying to operate with this mental illness, which she doesn't really know what it is. It keeps being misdiagnosed and all the rest of it. Yeah, sort of trying not to push away her loved ones away from her, but at the same time kind of doing the self-destruct button and sort of saying, well, you should be able to do this for me and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting look at mental health, I thought, and mental illness. Another aspect of the novel, which I loved, is it is very, very funny. It is very funny, which is kind of, considering that we're looking at mental illness and stuff, it just has this really pithy, sort of one-linery sense of humour, which I loved. It's not often that I read a book which makes me laugh out loud a lot, and this made me laugh out loud a lot. I mean, you know, for instance, I mean, within the first 10 pages, there's a reference to the Bake Off ice cream gate thing, and anything that references that in its first 10 pages is onto a winner, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, so not just the references, but the one-liners and just the wit of it is yeah, it's just really, really, really funny, and I was just like, I really loved it a lot. Now, your enjoyment of this novel, it does depend, I think, on whether you are okay with the middle classiness of it all. So yeah, Martha, she comes from this very kind of bohemian. She has very sort of bohemian-y sort of parents. Her mother is a sculptor. Her father is kind of like a failed poet. They also kind of rely on her mother's sister, so Martha's aunt, who lives with her husband in Belgravia, which, if you don't know, Belgravia is like a very, very, very affluent part of London, central London. So yes, so they got money, girl. So yeah, whilst the things that happen in this book are catastrophic and very emotional and sort of life-changing and, you know, all the rest of it, her rock bottom is not the same rock bottom as someone in a Douglas Stewart novel, for example. Yeah, these are middle-class people. Martha always has a safety net of sorts, in terms of she can always stay with her parents, she can always you know, stay with her aunt in Belgravia. Her work, I mean, she does work. She has a series of kind of retail jobs, and then also she starts to she's a freelance writer, essentially. She writes columns in various magazines and stuff. But yeah, I never really felt like, oh god, I need to find a job to pay the rent. You know, I never really felt that. I mean, I didn't have a problem with that. I mean, because it's not apologetic about it. That's what I was like. Okay, yeah, it just is what it is. I think some people will want a kind of a checking of privilege in this book, but I don't. I think it works that it doesn't have that. I think, yeah, she doesn't. Yeah, Meg Mason, she doesn't apologise for who these characters are, and that's, you know, I prefer that than trying to sort of say, oh, sorry, reader. I mean, yeah, like Martha, she has a friend at one point who says, oh, I have a spare flat in Paris you can stay in if you want. And so she does. She stays in this flat in Paris for, you know, a few years. So it's like that, y'all. It's like that, y'all. It's like that. It's like that, y'all. But that being said, yeah, I think, and that's why I think the humour kind of comes across so, because you can't have this kind of humour in a Douglas Stewart novel, for example, with people having mental health crises and, you know, spinning out.
How have you been? Spinning out.
But yeah, I loved the climax. I love how it all kind of goes, ah! I love how she sort of spins out of control. I love how it's really about motherhood and yeah, and the kind of the sort of the expectations we have of our loved ones to be mind readers or to expect. Yeah, I just thought it was really clever. And yeah, Martha, she's kind of not a likable character, although she is very, very funny. She's not particularly likable. She has this sort of selfish edge to her, although is it selfishness? Is it just the only way that she could be? It's just very, very layered, and I liked it a lot. It did win very recently. It won a Nibby, I think it's what it's called. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, if it won, I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't be unhappy. It's really kind of yeah, I think it's really, really good, and I would recommend it if you can stomach, in a cost of living crisis, if you can stomach the middle classness of it all, then yes, I would thoroughly recommend it. Okay, next up we have The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. I'm conflicted about this book. I am very, very conflicted about this book. Yeah, it's an interesting time reading this book. I was like, and then having read a little bit more about the author and about the book, I'm kind of a little bit, it sort of made me even more confused. So here we go. So what we got? So we've got Tuki, who is Native American, and at the beginning of the book, she has just finished a sentence in in prison jail, for quite a severe crime. Although when she was committing it, she didn't quite realise the severity of what she was doing. She was sort of more or less exploited into doing it, sort of unknowingly. Well, she does this crime, and she's given a fairly hefty sentence for it. But at the beginning of the book, she has been released, and she starts to work as a bookseller in this bookstore. And this bookstore is an independent bookshop. It's kind of Native American sort of literature leaning, and there's a bunch of kind of off-center quirky characters in there, and sort of off-center quirky regulars. And one of these regulars has recently died and has begun to haunt this bookstore, and begins to kind of, as the novel sort of progresses, this ghost, she kind of becomes more and more emboldened, particularly towards Tuki as well. And so, yeah, so that's kind of like a general premise of what most of the book about. It's about this kind of haunted bookshop, and about this kind of interesting protagonist with a very kind of specific and interesting backstory with very off-center characters. All very well so far. We like a good eccentric ghost story plot. But, so this novel has a very specific time and place. So we are in the year 2020, and we are in the city of Minneapolis. So that means two things, doesn't it? That means, first of all, the pandemic. So the pandemic features heavily in this book, in the second half of the book. And, of course, it also means the murder of George Floyd and the aftermath. And particularly in the city of Minneapolis, it means, the upside down, the city turning upside down, and the riots and the police brutality, the protests and the arson attacks and all the rest of it. So yeah, we have that in the novel as well. And for me, that kind of specific time and place didn't really gel with the rest of the book for me when I was reading it, because there's a section that looks specifically at the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, and in that bit the haunted bookstore plot kind of gets forgotten a bit, as you would expect. But as I was reading it, and it was interesting to kind of look at a novel and characters who are dealing with their city turning upside down and everything, but in the back of my head I was like, but we've still got a haunted bookstore plot going on. Is that kind of what's going on? I think I am really interested in one or the other. I think I would be fascinated in a book that looked at being in 2020 in Minneapolis, and from a Native American perspective. There is a novel which looks specifically at that from a straight perspective, and just goes and just focuses on that specifically. And then also, I mean, on the other side, in the other sort of plot of it, there is something I was really liking, this this kind of weird, eccentric bookstore plot with this ghost who, in life, she's a white woman who maybe takes too much of an interest in Native American culture. She's someone who kind of wants to, kind of insert herself. So that's interesting, and particularly from a ghost perspective as well, who's continuing that into like a ghost thing. I thought that was fascinating. But the two together, I don't know, it just didn't really quite gel. Having said that, I mean, I've done a little bit of I looked about, at the end there's about the author, and I didn't realise that the bookstore is actually based on an independent bookstore that Louise Erdrich owns in Minneapolis. And so that kind of like made me go, oh, hang on, because she has direct experience of this stuff. But again, at the same time, these two different ideas for me just, I don't know, they just didn't gel for me. You might not think that, of course. You might think that this is fabulous, and plenty of people do, so don't take my word for it. Give it a go and see what you think. But yeah, for me, I was just like, I was just a bit kind of, I wasn't uneasy, I didn't feel uncomfortable about it or anything like that, but I just felt like, So that means I've read 5 out of the 6 shortlisted books. The only one I haven't read yet is The Bread the Devil Need. The Bread the Devil Need. Unfortunately, I've had a look and it's not available at my library until the 13th of June, and the prize is announced. The winner is announced on the 15th. So I don't know whether I'm going to be able to read it before the winner is announced. I'm going to reserve it just in case, because you know these books they get available earlier, but we shall see. So out of the 5 that I've read, my specific ranking would be Great Circle. I would like that one to win. Second place, Sorrow and Bliss. Who knew? Second place, Sorrow and Bliss. Third place would be Island of Missing Trees. I think that's the one that's going to win, personally. But yeah, that's my third place, and that's a sort of strong third place. Fourth, then, I think Book of Form and Emptiness, and then The Sentence, I think. Hopefully I'll be able to read The Bread the Devil Needs before the winner is announced, but we shall have to wait and see, won't we? Right. So yes, back to our usual scheduled programming. You wanna buy a sundial? Okay, next we have a couple of poetry collections. I'm not going to talk too much about these, but I've got a couple of poetry collections to talk about. So the first one, so I talked about this in my London book haul video, just gone. So I've read through If Not Winter, Fragments of Sappho, translated by Carson. Yes, this is another Sappho collection that I've read through. As I said in my book haul, this was fairly sort of spur of the moment. I saw this and I was like, ooh, yeah. And I mean, I was very giddy in my book haul. I talked about this was like, oh, I love this so much. And I do love this so much. May you sleep on the breast of your delicate friend. Sorry. I do. Right, sorry. Start from the beginning. Sappho. Sappho was around in the 1600s BC, or BCE, on the island of Lesbos. There's a lot of kind of myths about her. She was there's a lot of myths about her sexuality and stuff, but she was a poet who did know it, and she was really very, very influential. Plato called her the 9th muse or the 10th muse. So yeah, she was sort of highly, highly respected in her day, and throughout kind of ancient Greece and Rome. But unfortunately, what is left of her work is very. As you can see, this sort of thing. There's not much of her poetry left, if at all. I think there's one poem. There's one sort of full poem which has survived, and the rest are just tiny little fragments and bits and pieces. And so yes. So translators have a very kind of interesting, tricky job of deciding what to do with these fragments. And some translators like to try and fill in the gaps, or try to sort of make the poems sort of flow a little bit. Anne Carson, on the other hand, she is very, very adamant and pedantic in just translating what is there and nothing else. And this book is so fascinating because you have the original Greek on one page and the translation on the other. And as you can see, each poem has its own, for the most part, each poem has its own page. And, you know, some of them, you know, are just, you can't really... So, for instance, this one that I've just put on, so it has, right here, now, again, for... So, you know, do you get anything from that? Well, I mean, no, but some of them, oof. Like, even just this, like, there's something about this. Youth! And there's all these things where we don't quite know what the things are, but then there's just youth. There's something about that which I really love. I can't explain it. There's another one which is just, like, sinful. There's something fascinating about it. I really love it. I really, really love it. Do I still yearn for my virginity? Probably. Yeah, I really love it. Now, some of them, I mean, there's like, towards the end, do not move stones. Some of them, like, towards the end, there's one which is just celery. I don't think this is for everyone. I don't think everyone will sort of have the same reaction to this as I as I do, because people will just look at, you know, a one-word poem which is just celery and being like, what? But I don't know, I just really like it. I really like it a lot. Because of the way it is, you can sort of read it cover to cover, sort of within a coffee shop sitting, which I did on the first, you know, as soon as I got it, I went to a cafe and I just sort of went through it. And I just, yeah, just really fell in love with it. Eros shook my mind like a mountain wind falling on oak trees. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Okay, yeah, so then also, I've been also looking at some more contemporary, well, very contemporary poetry. So I was sent this by the publisher. Well, I was sent to, yeah, I was sent this, More Fire, and also The Fire People. So I was sent these by the publisher. And now I don't read poetry at all, really. So this is kind of like a new thing for me to read poetry. So this is a reissue of The Fire People, which was first published in 1998, I believe. And this is in conjunction with a new anthology which they have published. And I've been more interested to read this first because this is kind of, you know, contemporary stuff. I was just interested, and it is a new collection of Black British poetry, and it's edited by Kayo Chingonyi. And yeah, I've been really enjoying kind of just dipping in and out of it. Now, from someone who doesn't read a lot of poetry, I'm now going to state the bleeding obvious. So there's something about poetry. It's just very specific, isn't it? And it's interesting just how revealing it is, how much more revealing it is than other works of literature or other forms of literature. Because a poet, you do have to do a lot of things as a poet. Obviously, you have to choose your words very specifically. Obviously, the specificity of language and words and where they're placed is very, very important. And also, I mean, the rhythm and the structure and, you know, how things flow, but also how I mean, we're not talking about spoken word poetry, we're talking about the written poetry, but how your poem is sort of laid out on the page also is a very important thing. And all these things married together, it does reveal a lot more about your subject or what you're trying to convey, a lot more than other sort of forms of literature. That's what I'm sort of finding anyway. And I mean, this collection, I mean, it is incredibly varied and diverse in terms of its subject matters and all the rest of it. But it is very revealing about, you know, sort of Black Britishness, and yeah, I'm just finding it really, really fascinating. There's ones that I'm really drawn to. So there's ones by Dean Atter, which I was liking. There's one by, what's her name? Kim Squirrel. She does a really gorgeous one called I Want to Write a Poem About Togetherness, and it's just this really gorgeous thing about family and her son and stuff, and it's really, really lovely. I really like that. There's one which is very sexually explicit, but which I thought was very interesting. And this, I mean, this is just like punctuation marks. Interesting. So yeah, no, I'm just really enjoying just dipping in and out of it and sort of introducing myself to contemporary poetry, which is interesting. So at some point I'll get to the Fire People as well, but yeah, this one I'm sort of just enjoying. I'm enjoying going through this for now. So yes. So next we have an interesting one. So talking about Francis Bacon on the cover of this, we have an interesting one. So we have The Death of Francis Bacon by Max Porter. This is a very, very small novella. It's about 70 pages, and I was interested. I picked it up just spur of the moment because I was interested in the title, and obviously Max Porter is quite a kind of big old respected person in terms of his other work. Although I haven't read Grief is a Thing with Feathers or Lanny, but I was just interested in this because of the subject matter. So this is a tiny little novella about Francis Bacon on his deathbed in Madrid, and kind of it's made up of, I think, 7 kind of vignette chapters, which are kind of like written paintings. Yes, he kind of he's on his deathbed and he finds that he is alone. No one is sort of coming to visit him or anything like that. The only person that is visiting him is a nun. And yes, he's sort of like mulling over certain stuff. So I was really interested in that premise, and also because Francis Bacon, I mean, I do like his paintings. His paintings are really terrifying and horrible and nasty, but there's something about them which I really love. So I was interested. However, this book was a bit of a disappointment, I'm afraid. So, yeah, it's done in this kind of fragmentary style. It's a very kind of surreal, abstract type of thing. And I was kind of like about 20 or 30 pages in, and I was like, I'm not quite sure about this. I went onto YouTube and I watched a video of Max Porter talking about this, and it didn't win me over. I was just like, oh, okay, because going through this work, I never really felt Francis Bacon. I didn't really feel the essence of Francis Bacon. And yes, there is kind of visceral language and kind of nasty kind of fluids and stuff talking about, and teeth and meat and stuff. But still, there was something about Francis Bacon and his paintings, that the sort of the essence of those kind of very visceral paintings, that just wasn't translating into what was on the page here for me. And watching that video of him talking about writing the book, he brought out his he talked about his passion about Francis Bacon, but he brought out this scrapbook from his I can't remember how old he was, whether it was at uni or at, I think it was more school. I think it was at school doing like an A level or something. He brought out this scrapbook of his kind of art project looking at Francis Bacon, and I was like, right, yeah, okay, this is kind of what this is. This is Max Porter's kind of sketchbook about Francis Bacon. It's not really, for me, like I don't know whether this is kind of like for me to say, but I don't think I did get that. I was like, okay, this is Max Porter's ideas and sort of notes and fragments about Francis Bacon, rather than getting into the heart of what Bacon is about. Yeah, so a bit of a disappointment. This I did read all of it, and it didn't really blow me away at all, really. Yeah, I was kind of like, oh, Max Porter. I would think, I would recommend this only if you are a Max Porter massive fan and you've read the 2 other things. I haven't read those 2 others. Yes. Okay, so we have a big one now. So I read, finally, Dracula by Bram Stoker. What? Dracula by Bram Stoker. Yeah, I've never read this before. And I finally read it for the first time. Flippin' heck. First of all, Penguin Classics. I mean, this cover is fine, isn't it? It's kind of a bit, it's sort of, okay. So, right, so, yeah, I've never read Dracula, but obviously, through various pop culture stuff, you do know what Dracula is.
Dracula, or Dracul, or Drac, or
Yes, we have Jonathan Harker, who is this guy who has gone over to Transylvania to Count Dracula's castle, because Count Dracula is interested in moving. He's interested in buying some property in London, and he wants a solicitor or someone to go over and to help him with that. So Jonathan goes over to help him with that. But very quickly, he realizes that Count Dracula is a bit weird and lives in a very weird place, and lots of weird and horrible, nasty things are happening.
Ooh, I'm a mountain biking vampire witch from the future.
And he is basically imprisoned in this castle. Yes, some very sort of scary things start to happen. Then in the sort of the second half, so he manages to escape. And in the second half, we kind of go to England itself. And there's some various different things that are happening with various different characters. which are sort of preparing for Count Dracula's arrival. So we have Lucy, or sort of Mina and Mina. Is it Minna or Mina? I don't know. Mina and Lucy is sort of a sleepwalking person who is, who keeps being visited by bats and keeps having her blood drained away for reasons. So yes, you have all these sort of different characters who then sort of convalesce to defeat Count Dracula when he arrives in England. And it's all very, very silly and very exciting and very, very. So this is so first of all, I mean, this is horror, and I was surprised by how horror-y it gets. I mean, there's kind of like moments which are like, oh, all right, Bram Stoker with your horror. It is fairly kind of silly, but it is fun silly. It is very fun silly. I really did like it. The second half is kind of where things slowed down a bit for me. So there's a lot of sort of preparing to kind of finally kill Count Dracula, and it just sort of goes on for a little bit. And the climax of the book, I mean, it's fine, but it's kind of, you are chasing a box, pretty much. But no, I was just fascinated by it because obviously one of the downfalls, whatever that word is, of reading this book now, having not read it before, is that you do know what is going on. Like, you do know, like, what a vampire is and what Count Dracula is and stuff. And the book kind of assumes that you don't know that because it's new. It's the first, thing. So, there's a bit of kind of like, okay, well, I know what's going on before the characters do. The whole stuff with Renfield, when you're first introduced to Renfield, is such a sort of horrible concept. This guy who basically wants to consume things alive, and the things sort of keep getting bigger and bigger. So you get flies, and then you get spiders, and then you get birds and stuff, and it's just like, ah! So that's pretty grim. So Count Dracula, he does lose his kind of scariness as the book kind of progresses, because, as I say, you are sort of chasing a box for at the end of it. But Mina, I'm going to call her Mina. Her as a character, she's quite funny because there's a lot of, particularly in the second half, you get all these blokes who are like, we have to sort of protect the woman. She's a woman. She can't know about these things. And she's often the one who's the most level-headed, which I thought was quite funny. She does like play along. She's just like, oh yes, you are the men and you are brave. But there are times when she's sort of, it's just funny. Also, the style of it, would this be classed as an epistolary novel? It's told through diary entries, and kind of and telegram entries and stuff like that, which is interesting. It kind of works and it kind of doesn't, obviously. When things get exciting, it's like, well, it's being written after the fact, so it sort of works and sort of doesn't. But I mean, there are actual sort of really sort of chilling bits and sort of like, ooh, exciting bits and horror bits, and I was just very kind of like, ooh, I like this a lot, don't you know? Bram Stoker Dracula. And finally, I recently just finished this, Less, by Andrew Sean Greer. So my friend sent me this, and I was very grateful to him for doing that. And in my book haul video, my last book haul video, I was suddenly taken by the fact that it won the Pulitzer, which I didn't know. I was like, oh, it won the Pulitzer, what? And someone in the comments very helpfully said, just calm down with that Pulitzer thing. Just don't let that sort of become too big of a deal, because the book itself is kind of, sort of gentle read. So don't make the Pulitzer thing, stand out. And I was really grateful to that person who commented that, because yes, I think if I had gone and like, let's win the Pulitzer, I don't know, it would have like changed my reading experience. So I'm grateful to that commenter. So this is an interesting one. So this is about Arthur Less, who is a gay man. He is just about to turn 50, and his former lover, his younger lover of 9 years, is about to get married, and he's just received the wedding invitation, and he doesn't want to go because it'll be sort of too like, so instead he accepts all these literary engagements and events around the world, And so Arthur Less is a novelist. It says on the blurb that he's a failed novelist. I wouldn't say he's a failed novelist. He's just a novelist who's just not drumming up a lot of attention anymore. So he goes around the world to all these sort of weird and wonderful literary events, like a random awards ceremony in Italy, an evening with Arthur Less in Germany or something. And he goes to Morocco and India and Japan and stuff, and basically anywhere to sort of run away from this wedding. And it's a short little book, basically about running away from your responsibilities, but it's also about regret, and it's about growing older, and it's about realizing that you're not young anymore.
You're not young.
And it's a very interesting, funny book, gentle book, which is interesting. So it is talking about an age-old trope, which is the middle-aged gay man having a midlife crisis. And I've seen and I've read lots of stories and books which deal with that. But it's interesting sort of with this one because it is so... it's very self-knowing, it's very self-aware. It's not meta in a sense, but there is kind of like a self-knowing thing about it. Because this is a novelist... and because Andrew Sean Greer, was kind of like a similar age, maybe a bit younger when he was writing this. It's just interesting. There is a sense of Andrew Sean Greer kind of writing it and being aware of the similarities. And so, for instance, there's a bit where, because Arthur Less, he's writing a novel about a middle-aged white gay man sort of having a sort of little journey around San Francisco, and people sort of comment on it and say like, well, it's just, who cares about a middle-aged white man, having problems. So I thought the book was just very clever in sort of addressing that, and the fact that it's short and sort of witty and pithy and stuff, and it's like, okay, we're not going to take up too much of your time with this character, but you're going to enjoy it whilst you're reading it, and I did enjoy it whilst I read it. There are sort of genuinely funny bits. There are genuinely kind of uncomfortable bits. But it never felt sort of too cynical. It never felt too bitter, because sometimes these types of stories, they do have a sort of bitterness about them, or they do have a kind of like a mocking tone. Like if you ever read a Kevin Elliott play or something, there is a kind of like this person is not attractive anymore, and la la la. But there isn't any of that in this. It's very, very warm-hearted and very sort of kind-hearted, even though Arthur Less, he does make mistakes, and there are moments where he's not likable. So I liked the discussions about age and about getting older, and how now that he is 50, about how anyone new who meets him will meet a middle-aged man. They will never meet, the younger man who he sort of still thinks he is. Not that he thinks he is, but who he still sort of like, wants to try and emulate, which I thought was interesting. Also the kind of intergenerational, or the sort of the age gap relationships. Sometimes, because he is a 49-year-old who's been going out with someone who is a lot younger, but before that he was the younger guy going out with the much older man who was the very, very famous poet who wins a Pulitzer in the book, which is interesting. Whilst it has the potential to be derivative, I never really felt that. I felt like it was a character trope which was being explored in a very sort of interesting, funny, witty, warm way, I think. Yeah, no, I really liked it. I thought it was really, really fabulous. I'm glad I didn't have that kind of like... Hello. I'm glad I didn't have that kind of it's won the Pulitzer in my head, or I was told not to have that in my head, because it is a really interesting choice for a major award, because it is a comic book and it is a short book, and it's just it's not trying to do anything kind of majorly like it just wants to tell this very simple story in a very sort of funny way, and I thought it was very good. I enjoyed it a lot. So there. Very quickly, I will just give a bit of a Proust update. So I am still reading Volume 3, The Guermantes Way, and I am literally halfway, just over halfway now. And yes, I won't say anything about the plot just yet, but I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying this one. And we shall see. I mean, it's going to take me another month to get to the end of it. And I think that's the pace that I've sort of discovered works well for me. So 2 months per book. So yeah, we're literally looking at this for the rest of the year in search of lost flipping time. It's going to be a year-long project, which I'm sort of enjoying. I am enjoying the project a lot. You know, I've heard that reading Proust is not about the destination; it's about the journey, and I'm liking the journey a lot with Proust, with Marcel. And then just a quick sort of TBR for June. I've just started Song of Solomon. For a couple of books from the library, I've got Book Lovers randomly, and Chinua Achebe, Arrow of God, the second, the follow-up to Things Fall Apart. So yes, that's what's happening in June. Right, it's suddenly gotten very dark. There's a very sort of black cloud overhanging me. Count Dracula, are you there? Right, so thank you very much for watching. If you've been watching, it's been all over. It's really dark. It's really dark. It's been a bit all over the place, this wrap up, but yes, hopefully things are okay with you. And I shall see you in June for our mid-year freakout tag. So there we go. Thank you very much, and fare thee well. Bye bye.